sacrifice. Apatya kama, desiring a son. So a translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. At this time, being desirous of obtaining a son, a leader of dacoits who came from a Shudra family wanted to worship the goddess Bhadra Kali by offering her in sacrifice a dull man who is considered no better than an animal. Purport: low-class men such as Shudras worship demigods like goddess Kali or Bhadra Kali for the fulfillment of material desires. To this end, they sometimes kill a human being before a deity. They generally choose a person who is not very intelligent, in other words, an animal in the shape of a man. Om Ganatimidandasya Kananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. At this time, being desirous of obtaining a son, a leader of dacoits who came from a Shudra family wanted to worship the goddess Bhadra Kali by offering her in sacrifice a dull man who was considered no better than an animal. So this particular part of the Bhagavatam, we're hearing about a low-class man who, according to Bhagavatam, is categorized as a Shudra. So this can sometimes be a little bit of a controversial topic because no one wants to be called a low-class person. And here we're hearing that Shudra and low-class person are basically grouped in the same category, which is a little bit of a problem because, as we know, Srila Prabhupada left this world, and before leaving, he told us all that he had given us 50% of his work, but the other 50% of his work was left unfinished, and that was specifically meant for us to finish for him. And that other 50% is the establishment of something known as Varnashram Dharma. And of course, half of that, the ashram side, to some degree is there within ISKCON. We have brahmacharis, we have grihastas, we have vanaprasthas, and we have sannyasis. And in all of those ashrams, we have good examples, devotees who are doing it very nicely. But the other side of things, the varna side, is sort of how to really do that. And one of the main problems, or one of the big problems, is that that includes seemingly grouping devotees into things such as Shudras, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmanas. And so naturally, one's going to be hesitant to want to accept the designation of a Shudra if they were to just read this in a very superficial way, that a Shudra is some low-class person who is happy to sacrifice others for the fulfillment of their own material desires. So if one reads that out of the context of the rest of Prabhupada's books, or the philosophy that Prabhupada's given us, then naturally they'll just think, well, why would I want to contribute to establishing a society of Varnashram Dharma when I'm going to be labeled as something like a Shudra, which is just this low-class person. So I personally feel it's important for myself to try to understand that there's actually a vast difference between someone who is a Shudra and a non-devotee, and someone who is a devotee or aspiring to be a devotee, trying to become a devotee, but at the same time perform the work of a Shudra, or is inclined towards that kind of work. So, yeah, we don't want to have some sort of misunderstanding, because devotees are very special. It's not that because one is inclined to a particular type of work, then they should just be labeled that way, but rather we should see the devotional qualities that this person has. So Varashram Dharma, it's all based upon the modes of material nature. Everything that we see around us is based upon the modes of material nature. There's a saying that we are what we eat. So, cereal companies, when I was a kid, they always used to use this expression to try to sell things like wheat picks. I don't know if you have wheat picks in America, but in New Zealand, then there was always ads on TV of, the All Blacks, the famous rugby team. And they were always coming on television, they were eating these wheat picks. And so the impression was that, they would always say you are what you eat. So the impression was that if you eat wheat picks, then you'll grow up to be an All Black, a famous rugby star. Yeah. Of course, it's probably not the case, but it is a fact that we are what we eat. And it's not just what we eat in terms of our food stuff, but what all of our senses eat, what our ears are eating through the process of hearing, what our eyes are seeing, of course, what our tongue is tasting, what we're smelling, what we're touching, everything that we come in contact with our senses is constituted by the three modes of material nature. So then naturally there will be different divisions of men and women who are dominated by different modes of nature. But that doesn't mean that one is designated for their whole life under one particular mode of nature. But actually we can change according to what we are in association with. So at birth, as we hear in this age, Kalo Shudra Sambhavo, everyone is actually born of a lower mode of nature, and therefore they're inclined towards lower activities. But we see as people become devotees, then their inclinations and their desires change, they become elevated. Even though they may still have their inclinations towards a certain type of work, their consciousness becomes elevated. And you'll see that in many examples of devotees within our own day-to-day life, but even within Bhagavatam, or within the Vedas, for example, Maharaj Yudhisthira. It was obviously, he's a king, but if you see, by hearing about his life, that he's actually extremely Brahminical. Samodamastapasham, Kshantir Arjavam. So this Samodama Tapa, he was self-controlled. So this vision of equality, neutral towards everyone, self-controlled. Tapa, he would perform austerity. Shocham, he was clean. Kshantir Arjuna, Evacha, he was honest, religious, tolerant. Jnana Vijnana Astika. So he had this Jnana Vijnana, this knowledge and realized knowledge. So when you hear about the qualities of Maharaj Yudhisthira, you would think that actually he's a Brahmana. It said he never told a lie in his life, but yet he was acting as a Kshatriya. So for devotees, it's a little bit different. They may have their role, their inclinations, but their qualities are often much higher than what you would expect of a certain person within Varna or Ashram, within their particular Varna. So it's said that Yasyastir Bhaktir Bhagavati Kinchana Savarganas Tatra Samasate Sura Arava Bhaktasya Kuto Mahadguna Manorate Nasati Tavato Bahahi. Therefore, one who has Bhaktir Bhagavat. So bhakti towards Bhagavan, the Supreme Person. Then Sarva Gunas Tatra. And that person, Sarva Gunas, the qualities of the Sura, of the demigods, reside within that person. And on the other hand, Harava Bhaktasya Kuto Mahadguna, a person who has abhaktasya, no devotion, then Prabhupada explains many times, of course this is coming from Bhagavatam, but Prabhupada would often make this point that that person who doesn't have devotion for the Supreme Person, he has no good qualities. So there's a vast difference between someone who's trying to have bhakti for the Supreme Person and someone who's not. Someone may be a brahmana by nature, but without bhakti, then their brahminical qualities can at any moment just disappear and they can become victim to the material energy. Whereas someone may be a Shudra by nature, but have so much devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead that they're fixed in saintly qualities no matter what situation they're in. Have the example of a Jamil who was trained as, like, if you read his qualities, he's like a Vedic saint. You know, you would think that this is practically a Paramahamsa. But because he was a Brahmana by birth and a Brahmana by training, but lacked devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then he wasn't actually able to fully control himself when put into a provoking situation. As Prabhupada says in Krishna book, a man's greatness is shown by his ability to tolerate provoking situations. So actually a devotee is the greatest man or greatest woman because of their devotion towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They actually have the strength to tolerate provoking situations, even though they may be coming from a low background. And of course, we don't become perfect overnight because actually the implication of this verse, Yasyasti Bhakti Bhagavat Yakinchana, Yakinchana is actually the important word there because it means bhakti without any motivation. So if we're thinking that, oh, okay, I've got devotion for Krishna, but I haven't seen all the qualities of the demigods manifest in me yet, what's wrong with this verse? It just means that we haven't come to the point where our bhakti is without motivation. But as Prabhupada said, devotees should be considered perfect because they're trying to become perfect. So, okay, yeah, we may not be on the highest platform yet, but we're confident that by applying the process that Prabhupada's given us, then gradually our bhakti will become without motivation and we'll actually develop these qualities regardless of where we are in where we came from, what kind of work we're inclined towards, where we see ourselves or where others see ourselves in terms of our varna. And again, as I said, Kalo Shudra Sambhava, actually we're all born of a lower nature in this age. And even if we astrologically have tendencies towards, say, for example, being a Brahmana, then if we're not trained in that, then what's the value of our tendencies? So most of us, even if we were to have a Brahminical kind of nature, we probably wouldn't find that out until we, met the devotees and after 5 or 10 years of practicing. And then we have to start trying to train ourselves to become a Brahmana after 20 or 30 years of basically being told that we're a Shudra by the society that we live in. So really we're all starting from a low position in Kali Yuga. But the important thing that I guess wanted to focus on is that by association, we can elevate ourselves from any status in life. And that's shown time and time again throughout the Vedas. Probably one of the best examples is in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where you hear about Nagari the hunter and how Narada Muni and I think also Angira Rishi were walking through the forest. Actually, yes. And they came across so many animals who had been half killed in the forest, as you know how the story goes. So they're thinking, who is this personality responsible for this? And they come across Nagari the hunter, and Narada Muni preaches to Nagari and explains to him that, what you're doing is going to cause you so much suffering in the future. So therefore you should change your habits. He instructed him how to change. And of course, when Narada Muni came back with Angara Rishi, then Angara said to him, Narada, you're like a touchstone. You've completely transformed this person. He'd become a saint. So if it's possible for him, then it's possible for us. Any person, by the power of association, can become transformed. All of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates practically were of low birth. His most intimate Ramananda Roy was considered a Shudra, and the person who he dubbed Namacharya, Haridas Thakur, was considered basically an outcast at the time. So you may think, oh yeah, that's just example from the Shastra, but we're not in Bhagavatam, we're not in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So what's the hope for us? We don't have Narada Muni coming down to visit us, and we're not hanging out with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But actually we don't know that. Perhaps Narada Muni does come to visit us in Kirtans. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's there in the form of his holy name, and his pastimes are still taking place. If we have some faith, then perhaps we'll see that one day, how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's presence is actually there in our lives. So it is possible for us to overcome this, and we'll see even materially that people overcome their tendencies. For example, in New Zealand, then the Aboriginal persons that were living there, the Maori people, Maori, they say Maori, Maoris, then they were a pretty intense tribe of people. Actually, some say that they were like a fallen Kshatriya class that came from India or around this area, sailed out to the Pacific. So persons that live in places like Tonga, Samoa, and New Zealand, they were basically like warriors who left their motherland and tried to find some other place to live. Whether or not that's true, who knows? But one thing's for certain is that they definitely have a warrior kind of spirit to them. But because of lack of dharma, then they basically just became like tribals. So you hear, it was only a couple of 100 years ago that New Zealand was colonized. So the history of the Māori people is quite well known in New Zealand. And they were very, very fierce persons. They were known for having tribes, and the warriors of the tribes, the leaders of the tribes, were known for eating the other leaders of the tribes, because they thought that by doing this, they would gain the mana or the power of the other leaders of these tribes. So they're pretty, in a lot of ways, very tamasic, the culture, how it developed or degraded. And then they were colonized and cheated basically by the British. So in a lot of ways, because they were oppressed and basically cheated out of their land and their resources, then their culture became even more tamasic in a lot of ways. And still that is there. That influence is still there, that influence of Tamagur to a large degree. Of course, it's there all throughout the material world. But I used to notice when I would go on Sankirtan that that tendency is quite strong. But what was interesting for me was that I would often meet someone who was born in this culture, very often very much can be associated with gangs, violence, drugs, alcohol. And so often we know these are activities, the mode of ignorance. But what would happen is I'd meet persons born in this culture who at a young age had gone over to Australia, and they were living on the Gold Coast, and they were aspiring for, material prosperity. And then they came back to New Zealand, and although the body looked to be of a certain culture, you could see very clearly that because of their influence by a culture from, for example, in Australia, where people are, especially in the Gold Coast, very passionate, then they had completely transformed their particular nature. So it's not to try to, I don't come across as being racist in any way, but what my point is actually the opposite, that doesn't matter which race or place we take birth, but it's really about what we associate with that makes us up. That determines what qualities we develop, and the qualities that we develop are based upon the modes of material nature that we're being influenced by, which is all about who we associate with. So even materially, we see that according to who someone associates with, they develop certain influences from different modes of nature. And then based on those modes, they develop qualities. And for us, that's important to understand, because there's certain qualities which are conducive to devotional service, and there's certain qualities that are not conducive to devotional service. So we have to try to understand how to use the modes of material nature to our advantage, so that we don't become degraded by them, but rather we become elevated by them. And I want to read to you a little section from Bhagavad Gita, which really illustrates this point. It's the first text, the 14th chapter. So I'll just read the text in purport because it's quite small. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Again I shall declare to you the supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained supreme perfection." Purport. From the 7th chapter to the end of the 12th chapter, Sri Krishna in detail reveals the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now the Lord himself is further enlightening Arjuna. If one understands this chapter through the process of philosophical speculation, he will come to an understanding of devotional service. In the 13th chapter, it was clearly explained that by humbly developing knowledge, one may possibly be free from material entanglement. It has also been explained that it is due to association with the modes of nature that the living entity is entangled in this material world. Now in this chapter, the Supreme Personality explains what those modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, how they give liberation. The knowledge explained in this chapter is proclaimed by the Supreme Lord to be superior to the knowledge given so far in other chapters. By understanding this knowledge, various great sages attained perfection and transferred to the spiritual world. The Lord now explains the same knowledge in a better way. This knowledge is far, far superior to all other processes of knowledge thus far explained. And knowing this, many attain perfection. Thus it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. So it's quite a profound purport, because basically Prabhupada's explaining that so far everything that's been talked about is actually knowledge that's inferior to knowledge of the three modes of material nature. And that if one can understand, Prabhupada says, by philosophical speculation, then he can come to an understanding of devotional service. So I always used to think about that. What does that mean? Because often speculation, kind of, if someone calls you a speculator and you're in ISKCON, and it's like a maha aparata, some sort of offense. Oh, you just like to speculate. So speculation kind of has this negative connotation to it. But there's a difference between speculation just within our own mind and speculation based on what we're reading, what we're hearing about. Actually, we're supposed to speculate. It's not that we're supposed to just read and just, this, and I just, next page, click my stopwatch on, click it off after I finish my time, just like some other duty in the day, like brushing your teeth. But no, we're actually supposed to sit down and use our intelligence. What is it that I'm actually reading? What does it mean that Arjuna says to Krishna, Krishna, why am I, acting why am I forced to act sinfully, even though I don't want to? And then, Krishna says, well, this is due to the influence of the modes of material nature. And basically it's called lust, and it comes from the mode of passion. So we could just read that and say, oh, okay, that's cool, and then move to the next page. But if we actually try to speculate, well, what does this actually mean for me? Am I in Arjuna's situation? Am I influenced to do things that I don't like to do? Do I have habits in my life that are actually not beneficial for me? Do I have habits that are invoking the mode of passion in my life, and therefore invoking lust and forcing me to act in such a way that I don't want to? So we're supposed to try to understand this knowledge, how it applies to us, and then how we can act in such a way that we're influenced as little as possible by the lower modes of material nature, because we should understand that the lower modes of nature, they're not beneficial for our application of sadhana bhakti. Basically, the modes of material nature, they're like a map, and they're showing us how, on a map, you have many different directions. If you go to a town, at least in New Zealand, there's a lot of tourist towns, and you go to the center of the town and you'll find all over the town, I've seen these boards, and on the board, it'll have a picture of the town laid out in bird's eye view. And you can see all the different streets and all the places that, you can go to, all the different hotspots, that people like to visit. But the most important thing about the map that makes the whole thing relevant is that there's a little thing that says you are here. Because if you don't know where you are, then you can't really utilize the map to go to the places where you want to go. So the modes of material nature, they show us that yes, if you act in ignorance, then you're opening up the gates to the hellish planets, door to the hellish planets. If you act in the mode of goodness, then you'll be elevated to the heavenly planets. And if you act in the mode of passion, then you'll stay here amongst the earthly realm. And of course, if you can cultivate transcendence, then you'll go to the spiritual world. So of the three different modes that we can be influenced by, then we know goodness is the mode that's conducive for transcending the material world. So when we read these things, like for example, the 14th chapter or the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, then it helps us to, if we philosophically speculate and try to understand, well, what category am I actually in? Do I like to eat really hot, spicy foods? Is my determination unbreakable? Or am I morose and lazy? Or all these different symptoms we can look and see, oh, wow. And it's actually can be quite humbling when we read about the three modes of material nature, because we'll say, wow, am I practicing devotional service in the mode of ignorance? Or am I practicing in the mode of passion, goodness? Or am I transcendental? So that's why this Prabhupada's explaining in this purport. And actually Krishna himself is saying that knowing which all sages have attained the supreme perfection. So all the sages of the past and all the great personalities, they understood this knowledge. And they didn't just understand it, but they understand where they sit within this map of the modes of nature and how to actually make advancement from that point. So yes, we're being told, Kalo Shudra Sambhava, we're born, most of us are born Vana Sankara. We're actually unwanted. We're basically a mistake. Pretty much most people these days were not born even consciously by their parents. So what kind of birth is that? It's to be honorable to be in a position of a Shudra, but with most of us, speaking for myself, are nothing even close to that. But somehow or other, by mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada, we get an opportunity to elevate ourselves to something completely extraordinary. So how that relates to today's verse, if we look at this person, this Shudra who is trying to capture Jada, then we should be able to see through the eyes of Bhagavatam, through the eyes of Bhagavad Gita, what is the nature of this person. Okay, they said that he's a Shudra. And Shudras are predominated by ignorance. We hear Shudras predominated by ignorance, Vaishya by passion, ignorance, Kshatriya by passion, and then Brahmanas by goodness. So if this person is indeed a Shudra, a low-class person, then they should be predominated by ignorance. So then we can read in Bhagavad Gita, well, what is the worship of someone in the mode of ignorance? And there we'll find that Krishna himself is saying that a person in the mode of ignorance, their worship or their penance involves self-torture or the torture of other living entities. And of course, that's what we're seeing. This person is wanting his own benefit, and he's willing to torture Jada, an innocent person, to get that. So it's very interesting. Of course, we probably would never think, oh yeah, I'll torture someone for my own benefit. But perhaps on a subtle platform, we will. His Holiness Shiva Ramaraj, in his book, Chant, describes how there's four different ways in which one can chant their japa according to the modes of nature, and he's basing it on Bhagavad Gita. Because as we know, in this age, the Yuga Dharma is to chant the holy names. So that's our penance, that's our austerity, that's our worship. And it can be done in the three modes of nature, and it can be done in a transcendental way. So he says that if we're chanting and within our minds we're thinking, oh, why is that Prabhu, the temple president? Or why is everyone glorify that Prabhu instead of me? Or why is that Mataji? Can't people understand that she's not even a devotee? Or however our crazy mind may preach to us that we want to actually drag down. We want to try to minimize someone else out of envy, when we're performing our worship in the mode of ignorance. And these kind of thoughts, at least speaking for myself, they can be, especially in the beginning phases of Krishna consciousness, we can be so full of envy from our previous activities that we envy even the Vaishnavas and the devotees to an extent that we don't want them around. We don't want to see them glorified. We don't want to see them appreciated. So we should be introspective enough to understand that actually I'm influenced by the mode of ignorance when these kind of thoughts appear. And then he says that passion, while we're chanting with this desire for name, fame, adoration, distinction, that we want to be recognized for our devotional service. That yes, when will people appreciate me for the fact that I'm such a great kirtan leader or such a great cook or such a great this or that. So we're looking for some sort of prestige by the performance of our japa. And then goodness is that we're just desiring to make spiritual advancement while we're chanting our japa. That's our determination, that's our desire, our motivation. But higher than that, Shiva Ramaraj explains his japa and transcendental platform, is that we're just thinking, yes, I'm doing this to please Krishna, regardless of whether or not I get name, fame, regardless of whether or not everyone else is better than me, regardless of whether or not I'm making spiritual advancement. I'm just doing this to please Krishna. Krishna is not different from his holy name. And I'm here every morning associating with Krishna just to show him that actually I'm trying to please him. So this kind of mentality is a transcendental mentality that we're trying to cultivate. But to get there, we have to try to use the modes of material nature in a way that will elevate us rather than degrade us. And I thought to share, some of you are probably quite aware of this section, but it describes it quite nicely. As Lord Kapila speaking about devotional service in the third canto. And it's always been a kind of a wake-up call for me when I'd read this section. So Lord Kapila says, This is text 8, chapter 29, 3rd canto. Devotional service executed by a person who is envious, proud, violent, and angry, and who is a separatist, is considered to be in the mode of darkness. Text number 9. The worship of the deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is devotional service in the mode of passion. Text number 10. When a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities of furtive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. So, on the one hand, yes, we should see that devotees are special regardless of their birth, regardless of the activity that they're inclined towards in terms of their work or their nature. We shouldn't really take that into account, and we should see that, yes, devotees are perfect because they're trying to become perfect. But at the same time, for ourselves, we should be aware that just because we're trying to become a devotee doesn't mean that we have to stop trying to become a devotee. Prabhupada said we should be strict with ourselves and lenient with others. So we should look around and see, yes, these devotees, they are trying to become perfect. Of course, there may be a situation where someone is, for example, in a leadership role, and we're concerned about the way they behave. That's something different, obviously, that can be addressed if needed. If someone is feeling that they're exploited or something like that, then of course that can be addressed in an appropriate way. But in general, like Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said, that you shouldn't be eager to take this service of having to point out what devotees need to work on. So because it's not a very pleasant service, actually I remember my first mentor, I was living in New Zealand, and he's one of my senior god brothers, one of Devamoon Raja's kind of first disciples, and he was running an ashram for young men before they decided whether or not they wanted to be a brahmacharya or a grihastha. So I was living with him for 1 year, and I can't even remember what I did, but he came out in one day of his room, and I'd done something really stupid. He told me not to do it multiple times. And I just remember him raising his voice and almost yelling, not quite yelling, but in a very loud voice and very commanding voice, telling me, "Do you think I like having to chastise you? Do you think I like it?" So I realized that, yeah, this is not actually a very pleasurable service, to have to try to point out the faults in others for someone who's actually an advanced devotee. But they have to do it out of compassion for younger devotees. So I believe that's Narada Muni who explains that we should make friends with those who are on an equal platform. We should worship our seniors, and those who are junior to us, then we should show them compassion. So sometimes for a senior devotee, they have to show that, but in general, we shouldn't be eager to take that position. We should be strict with ourselves and lenient with others, give devotees the benefit of the doubt that, yes, they're trying their best to become elevated. But for ourselves, we should see, wow, where actually am I in these modes of material nature? Am I performing devotional service in ignorance? Am I performing it in passion? Am I performing it in goodness, or am I striving for pure devotional service? Yanisha sarvabhutanam tasyam jagati sambhavi yasyam jagati bhutani sanisha pashito mune. Krishna explains that we should be pashito mune, an introspective sage. Our activities, at least internally, should be completely different from non-devotees. Our day should be like their night. So while we see non-devotees get so much fun out of criticizing one another, we should get fun out of glorifying the devotees, and being not critical of ourselves, but being introspective and aware of what we need to work on, so that we can become of better service to Krishna, to spiritual master, and to the other devotees. So I thought, because today's text, it was a little bit short, we've been discussing a lot about Jadabhara in terms of the topics. And I thought to speak a little bit about the other person who's appearing on the scene, this dacoit, and how he is influenced by the lower modes of material nature. And we'll see what the result will be by him acting in this way. It won't be very good for him. So we should see that and see in our own lives how also acting in the lower modes of material nature will not also become good for us, even if we're trying to be devotees. If we act according to the lower modes, it won't be good. At the same time, devotional service is absolute. So, as Krishna explains, whatever advancement we make on this path, there's no loss or diminution. But still, if we hear, there's no reason why we can't increase the quality of our service, the quality of our offering. So I'll stop there and ask if there's anyone that would like to comment or add a question or a correction. Hare Krishna, thank you.
Haribol, dear Aravinda Naba Prabhu, thank you for such a sweet, loving class full of compassion and care for Vaishnavas and people in general. It's that classic Kiwi sensitivity, which we need over here in America. And I just want to say I'm really inspired by your perspective on how to see everyone as a work in progress. I think that's so important. And you're really setting a good example. And thanks for all the great scriptural references. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu, for your kind words. Hare Krishna.
Arvind and Abba Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Just a quick question, technical more probably. You quoted this first verse from 14th chapter where Krishna describes that this is, the superior knowledge that I have described so far, even superior to what was said before. But we know from, Bhakti Shastris that in the middle of Bhagavad Gita, the most confidential knowledge is hidden, which is, what could be more supreme than the most confidential knowledge, like chapter 9, for example. So could you clarify this seemingly controversial statement?
Yeah. I have a feeling, and if I had a better memory, then it would be nice because I wouldn't. But I have a feeling that it may have even been Nagari Krishna Prabhu actually mentioned this recently when Devamrita Swami Maharaj was here. And from what I had heard and what I understood was that this is to be considered higher because it's actually how you apply that most confidential knowledge. So, for example, then the Chatur Shloki is, often we always hear, this verse, Tesham Satstayuktanam Bhajatam Pritipurvakam. So to those who have love and devotion, have priti, affection for me, then I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So you would think, well, surely that's like, the highest type of knowledge. That's all we need. Yes, that's true. But how will you develop affection for the Supreme Personality of Godhead if you can't escape the lower modes of material nature? Because, as we know, how we deal with the devotees is really just training for us how we deal with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So recently I was listening to one devotee and he was saying how, if we can't take the time to look after, one or two devotees that are around us, then how will we take the time to look after Radha and Krishna in the spiritual world? So, and devotees, they're more, Krishna is more impressed by our service to other devotees than he is our service to him. So if we're functioning in the lower modes of nature and we're envious towards the Vaishnavas, how can we expect to develop love and affection for the Supreme Personality of Godhead? So I think my understanding is that this knowledge is the most important, is considered superior because it gives us the ability and understanding how to apply the knowledge which has previously been spoken about. And if we lack that knowledge, if we don't understand what goodness, passion, and ignorance is and what it looks like, then we'll fail to actually apply all of the knowledge that we've been given previously. So that would be, my understanding. But perhaps you have something to say, Prabhu, because you're. I see you're.
I'm clapping. Yeah, thank you very much. I don't have anything to say. I was just really wanted to hear. Thank you. Very nice answer.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Okay, maybe we'll stop there unless Taraka Prabhu, you'd like to say something.
Sure, I'll say something. We still have a little time left, so you were talking. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for a nice class. I appreciate very much your speaking. We're talking about the fact that speculation is not necessarily a bad thing, that it's something that is required, that we should speculate. And this is, generally we hear Srila Prabhupada speaking negatively about speculation, that speculation will not lead to any conclusive understanding and is therefore useless. And so therefore we should accept knowledge from an authoritative source rather than speculate. I'm forgive me, I'm trying to formulate my question as I'm speaking here, but I guess part of my question is that I'm looking for some reference, some authoritative source for the idea that we should speculate. That's part of the question, I guess. In Bhagavad Gita, in the third chapter, third verse, Krishna speaks about empirical philosophical speculation. It says that some men who are trying to realize the self are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation. And he also mentions that there are, in contrast to that, he's talking about two different classes of people. So the others are those who are inclined to understand through devotional service. And of these two, well, in his purport, Srila Prabhupada comments on this, and he says that the indirect process is philosophical speculation by which gradually one may come to the point of Krishna consciousness. And the other process is directly connecting everything with Krishna and Krishna consciousness. Of these two, the path of Krishna consciousness is better because it does not depend on purifying the senses by a philosophical process. Krishna consciousness is itself the purifying process. And by the direct method of devotional service, it is simultaneously easy and sublime. So I found that interesting because here Srila Prabhupada is describing the process of philosophical speculation as one of purification. That the senses are purified by that sort of philosophical speculation, and I'm still contemplating this, trying to digest and understand precisely how that works. But I'd be interested to hear any further clarification that you can offer on the issue of speculation. And I've heard in probably the past month, maybe 3 times, devotees have commented on how actually, during Srimad Bhagavatam class, devotees have talked about how actually we should speculate. And the understanding that I have had for, I don't know how many years, is that while we, I just really only remember Srila Prabhupada hammering us about the futility of speculation, but contemplation of the philosophy is important. And I guess if you were to use the 2 words interchangeably, it would make sense that, but I don't know, for me, the word speculation carries a certain connotation because of the way that I've heard Srila Prabhupada most often use it. And so in my own mind, I tend to make a distinction between contemplation and speculation. I tend to think of speculation as utterly useless. A type of activity which Srila Prabhupada actually compared to gambling, that of the pillars of sinful life, the 4 pillars of sinful life, gambling, of course, is one. And Srila Prabhupada would describe speculation as also being a type of gambling and should similarly be avoided. So there's that understanding, but and then there's the other understanding which Krishna is describing here, philosophical speculation, which my understanding is that it is more of a type of contemplation. I make in my own mind a distinction that way, but anything you can offer to clear up my understanding of these things would be appreciated. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I think you're helping me to clear it up, because I'm in the same boat. It's I think, as I said, it does carry a certain connotation. But at the same time, I've always been kind of stumped by that whenever I read that section of Bhagavad Gita, because Prabhupada says what he says, that by philosophical speculation one can come to an understanding of devotional service. So I guess another way of looking at that statement is that, similar to what you were speaking about in the Bhagavad Gita, how there's this indirect process of philosophical speculation. So I guess another way of taking that statement is that, if someone hears about the modes of material nature without hearing the rest of the Bhagavad Gita, then they may speculate and come to the point of understanding that, actually the whole purpose of this is to become free from the system. And in order to do that, I have to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So perhaps that's another way of looking at it, but I would agree, and that's with what you said, and that's my understanding, is that sometimes this word speculation would be if Prabhupada uses it positively, then it would be more in the sense that we're encouraged to be thoughtful about what we read and about what we hear, and not just accept it on blind faith, but actually, of course, in one sense, if we can do that, then we're fortunate. Like Prabhupada says that, he says that women are blessed because it can be easier for them to just accept, whereas men, they can have the tendency to question, well, why should I accept? Which is not necessarily a good thing in some cases. So it actually requires some contemplation on the philosophy to come to an understanding that, yes, this is the best thing for me to do. So that is also my understanding of what Prabhupada says by philosophical speculation about the philosophy that's been given to us, but we don't deviate outside of we don't speculate outside of what Prabhupada has given us. But we are thoughtful about, like my Guru Maharaj always encouraged us, don't just read for the sake of reading, but think about what you read. If it takes you 2 hours to read a purport, then consider that you're 2 hours reading. So it's not about the pages, it's not about, but it's how much you think about what you read while you read. So yeah, that's my understanding of. But yeah, I would also like to hear more. So if anyone has any realizations they want to share, then please. But thank you for what you said, Taraka Prabhu.
Thank you for your comments, and I think there are some comments in the chat.
Perhaps someone could read them because I'm not so good with technology. So someone who can access them and read them would be appreciated.
Yashodev Prabhu references Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela 8:15. If you are indeed interested in logic and argument, kindly apply it to the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If you do so, you will find it to be strikingly wonderful. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Dai Karaha Vichara Karite Chitete Pave Chamatkar. And Venamadhurya Prabhu gives us the dictionary definition of speculation. Speculation is the forming of a theory or conjecture without firm evidence. And there is a second meaning, which refers to a type of investment in stocks, property, or other ventures in hope of gaining, but with the risk of loss. And there is something posted here by Nagari Gita Das, which it is so small I can't read it, and let me see if I can find a way to open this file. It needs to be downloaded. Okay, so this is another definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. First definition, there are two parts. Part A, to meditate on or ponder a subject, and the synonym is given reflect. And B, to review something idly or casually and often inconclusively. So there are two different ways to understand the term speculation. And this is helpful. So one is a kind of contemplation, and the other is inconclusive. And then we have a second definition here, to assume a business risk and hope of gain. So we're not talking about that sort of thing, but of the first definition, it can be as simply a type of reflection, or something which is inconclusive, and one could therefore say useless if it's inconclusive. So, but reflection or meditation, contemplation, of course, is the sort of thoughtfulness that you referenced, which is important, and which the Prabhupada advises that we must do, that we should be thoughtful. I would say that not everyone is a thoughtful person. Some people don't have the capacity to be thoughtful, but they are not barred from progressing in Krishna consciousness. We sometimes will speak about how concepts in Krishna consciousness should not be accepted blindly. However, if that's all you can do, blind acceptance actually is a good thing. if a child asks his father, what is this? And the father says, this is a table. The child understands that it's a table. He doesn't have to understand philosophically how it's a table. He just needs to know, if he accepts the authority of his father that this is a table, that's good enough. His knowledge is perfect. It's a table. So blind acceptance also can work quite well for us. If you have the capacity to contemplate, then my understanding is that if you don't engage that aspect of your consciousness, that it will become a distraction and impediment to you. So the process of contemplation, of being thoughtful, is actually one of the means by which you control your mind. Otherwise, your mind will lead you all over the place. So if you have that sort of consciousness, then that needs to be engaged. So for you, you need to be thoughtful about the philosophy. Others don't have that capacity, and for them, just simply to accept is quite good, and both individuals will arrive at the same point. Anyway, Hare Krishna, thank you very much. We've run over time. I suppose we're not going to get the darshan of the deities here in this chat, but thank you again, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare. Kantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nagari Vaishnavinda ki jai, the Taigo Pranandi.
आनंद भक्ति भाई श्री वृंद की जाए इसका फाउंडर आचार्य श्रील प्रभुपाद की जाए नाम आचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जाए प्रेम से कहा श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपाल गोपीनाथ श्याम राधा गिरी गोवर्धन की जय वृंदावन धाम की जय नवदी मायापुर धाम की जय गंगा माई की जय जमुना माई की जय तुलसी देवी की जय की जय सोमवेता भक्तवृंद की जय गौर प्रेमानंदे all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Hari Harpo. The attachment to his Lord's feet was the blessing that fulfilled all his desires. He opens my dark out and fills my heart with the senses of the love. He is my Lord's good earth. For he accepted many my enemies by ignorance to the throne. The Vedic scriptures say his character. Our spiritual master is devotion and mercy, and a friend of the poor, the Lord, the master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful to us. Give us the chain of your loyalty. Your fame is spread all over the free world. We take shelter in your own seat. Give it a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.